This experience is completely different from anything I have ever heard in my life. I have already talked to several colleagues who also work as truck drivers, and even they are shocked by what happened to me. So, this is the moment when you decide whether you have the courage to listen to me until the end. It all started on a night that seemed ordinary. I was on another one of my trips, this time leaving Aragona towards Serranova, transporting a load of construction materials. The road was the famous BR 153, known among truck drivers for its strange stories. It never crossed my mind that I would become part of one of them. I left Aragona around 5 in the afternoon. The sky was clear, the temperature pleasant, and it seemed like the perfect setting for the journey. However, as the hours passed and night fell, things changed strangely. A thick fog began to form, slowly appearing, taking over the road. At first, I thought it was just the humidity that was common at that time of day, but something was different. The fog was heavy, almost swallowing the truck's headlights. Around 8 in the evening, I stopped at a gas station in the Colinas region to fill up and have a coffee. The place was practically empty. There was only one elderly attendant sitting on a dingy chair under the awning that covered the gas pumps. He looked at me, a little suspicious. "Good evening," I said, getting out of the truck. He nodded in greeting, but didn't say anything as he filled up the tank. I decided to start a conversation, asking how the route was from there on, and then he finally opened his mouth. "Where are you going?" His voice was hoarse. "To Serranova." He let out a nervous laugh and muttered, "Be careful with the fog of the aimless. Many good people have gotten lost there." I gave a weak smile, thinking it was just another road legend. But the old man became serious and continued, "Have you ever heard of truck drivers who pass through the same places over and over again as if they were stuck? Well, it's no joke." A strange shiver ran through me. I thanked him, drank my coffee in a hurry, bought some snacks and got back to the truck. As I started the engine, the gas station attendant's words echoed in my head. At first the road was normal, but the fog was getting thicker and thicker. The GPS started to have strange bugs, and the truck's radio wouldn't pick up anything except a hiss. Even so, I kept going, thinking it was just a bad signal in the area. After about 40 minutes, the situation got really bizarre. It was as if the fog sucked up all the light. The headlights barely illuminated the asphalt. The GPS froze completely, frozen in a meaningless spot, and the radio went silent completely. The only sound was that of the engine and the rain that started falling out of nowhere. That's when the truck's dashboard started flashing. My first reaction was to think it was an electrical fault. But then I noticed that the right headlight was turning off intermittently. I cursed, tense. It was so dark that I felt like I was in an endless tunnel. I decided to pull over to the side of the road to check. As soon as I got out, the rain came down like a bucket of water, quickly soaking me. I bent down to see the headlights, and suddenly I heard some strange noises, as if someone was banging on the back of the truck. I looked around, but all I could see was fog, thicker than ever. My heart started beating fast. I went back into the truck, locking the doors. I started the engine, and before I could put it in gear, I heard knocking again, this time closer, as if it was coming from under the vehicle. This is no time for idle people to be joking, I thought nervously. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I nearly jumped out of my skin. In the middle of the fog, a little behind me, there was someone standing there. It looked like a man, but he was motionless, just staring at me. He was wearing a worn-out hat and seemed to be shrouded in fog. I blinked, and the figure disappeared. A shiver ran down my spine. I accelerated and continued on my way, feeling that this was just the beginning. As I drove, the road seemed longer than usual, as if I were going in circles. I passed the same gas station twice, the same billboard, and then a curve I swore I had made before. Nothing made sense. With each turn, the fog grew thicker, and the dashboard kept flashing. The GPS was still frozen and the radio was silent. My cell phone, of course, had no signal. Fear began to take over, and the knocking came back rhythmic, shaking the body of the car, as if something was trying to force me to stop. I saw figures crossing the road. They were fast, almost human. But when I looked straight ahead, there was nothing. I had the clear sensation that I was not alone, that something was following my truck, watching me. When I finally saw lights ahead, I felt an enormous relief. It was a small village surrounded by trees. I slowed down and entered. As soon as I passed the first street, a powerful shiver took hold of me. Everything was dark. There was no movement, no noise, just the sound of my engine and the rain that continued to fall. I parked in front of a bar with flashing neon signs, but the place looked abandoned. I decided to go in anyway. There were tables with glasses and plates left behind, as if people had left in a hurry. No one was there. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I called out, "Is anyone here?" But all I heard was my own echo in the empty room. Just when I was starting to think that staying there was worse than staying, I heard a strange noise. It wasn't a knock this time, but a faint whisper coming from the back of the bar. "For the love of God, help me," I thought, already sweating coldly, not knowing whether to run or investigate. Before I could make any decision, I saw a figure passing in front of a window. I didn't want to hear anything else. I ran back to the truck. As soon as I started the engine, the knocking on the body started again, this time louder. It seemed like something didn't want me to stop. The rain eased off, but the fog remained as thick as before. I felt like the road seemed to change, as if the curves were tighter and the asphalt was full of potholes. I drove like that for what seemed like an eternity, until everything escalated even further. That's when I saw that man from the fog again, standing in the middle of the road. This time he was closer, impossible to ignore. I slammed on the brakes and my tires screeched to a halt. He stood still, staring straight at me with empty eyes that seemed to see my every thought. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice shaking. He raised a hand and pointed to a sign ahead. It was crooked and read, "Danger ahead." I looked back at the man, but he had disappeared. I tried to drive on, but the truck's engine began to sputter. The lights flickered and then went out completely. Suddenly, I was standing in the dark, with no power. Everything was silent, except for a whisper that now seemed to be coming from inside the cab. It was as if voices were surrounding me, oppressing me. Then the knocking came again, loud enough to shake the entire truck. With my heart beating in my mouth, I closed my eyes and began to pray. Suddenly, the noise disappeared. When I opened my eyes, the fog was slowly dissipating, and in front of me was a sign indicating Serra Nova, 50 kilometers. I had the distinct sensation of having been brought back to reality, but I knew that something inside me would never be the same again. I arrived in Serra Nova feeling a little dazed. The city was lit up, full of life, but I felt empty, as if part of me had remained on that stretch of road. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. The man in the fog, the knocking, the figures. All I know is that after that experience, everything changed. And now, whenever I see fog on the road, my heart races. What about you? Would you still have the courage to hit the road on a night like that? 2. I confess that I'm here to share something that still makes me shiver just remembering it. I'm not sure if I should talk about this, but the truth is that whenever I drive in the middle of the night, the memory comes back. You know that feeling that something is wrong but you can't explain it? Well, it is. My name is Rubens, and I've been a truck driver for over 15 years. I've seen everything on the road, absurd accidents, illogical phenomena, but what I experienced that night is beyond any explanation. It was another one of those long trips from the far north to the south of the country. At first, everything went well. I loaded the truck, checked the parts, and set off. I always liked the calm of the night, the roar of the engine, the endless asphalt. It's almost therapeutic. But that night, everything was strangely silent, in a disturbing way. Not even crickets sang. It was just the engine and the occasional creaking of the cargo. The road seemed abandoned. No cars were crossing my path. The sky was starless, and only the truck's headlights cut through the darkness. I felt more tired than usual, but I tried to keep going. Then it happened. On the first sharp curve, I saw something in the passenger side rearview mirror. It was quick, a shadow that disappeared before I could identify it. It could have been my imagination or a reflection of light. But on the next curve, it appeared again, more clearly. This time it looked like a person sitting in the passenger seat. It was impossible. Fatigue might be playing tricks on me, I thought. But every time I changed the position of the mirror, that silhouette seemed to move, as if it wanted to show off or provoke me. I felt butterflies in my stomach that I hadn't felt since I was a child. I tried to focus on driving, but how could I ignore something that seemed to be right next to me? My heart was racing, my hands were sweating so much I could barely hold the steering wheel. And then came the worst, an almost imperceptible noise, like a whistle or escaping wind, but which grew until it became a whisper. I didn't understand the words, but it was a voice. And it didn't sound like anything human. It had a distorted, weird tone. Inside me, a voice screamed, "Don't look, Rubens, don't look." But how not to look? My stomach churned. The air felt cold in a way that didn't make sense, as if all the energy was being drained from it. I sped up, trying to get away. But the whisper continued, and the shadow grew closer in the mirror, leaning in, almost touching my shoulder. Then I saw, in the distance, the dim lights of a gas station. They seemed like a lifeline. I entered the gas station without thinking, parked quickly and jumped out of the truck with my heart still pounding. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just wear and tear. I went to the convenience store, got a coffee and stayed there, among people I didn't even know, just to feel some sense of security. I finally got the courage to get back into the truck. But before climbing into the cabin, I took a look out the passenger window. I needed to make sure nothing was out of place. At first glance, I didn't notice anything strange. But when I opened the passenger door, I came across something that almost made me fall backwards. The bench was full of marks, as if someone had been there, covered in dirt and mud, leaving traces on the surface. I stood still, not knowing how to react. I closed the door on impulse, ran back to the convenience store, but didn't have the courage to say anything to the others. Who would believe it? Who would believe that I had a shadow passenger dirtying the seat and whispering horrors to me? After a while, I realized I had no choice. Needed to complete the delivery. I walked back to the truck with shaky legs. Just getting close to the door made me feel that chill down my spine. When I started the engine, I tried to focus on the sound of the diesel, the asphalt, anything other than the seat next to me. Even so, the air became heavy, suffocating. The whispering returned, but this time clearer, as if it was trying to form sentences. The sounds were elongated, metallic, almost painful to hear. With every turn, I felt the presence grow stronger. I avoided looking at the seat, but it seemed like it was moving, poking at my mind. And then, right in the middle of the deserted road, the engine started coughing, the dashboard flickered, and in an instant, everything went dead. The truck simply stopped, without any power. Outside, everything was still dark, but I could feel something surrounding me. My breathing quickened. I was alone, at the mercy of something I didn't even understand. Suddenly, the shadow in the passenger seat began to take shape. It was like a humanoid blur, but with no defined features, no face. It seemed to be staring at me, and a voice invaded my head, talking about a tragedy, an accident on that stretch of road, a life taken away. It seemed to blame me, even though I didn't understand why. My mind screamed that I was going crazy, but at the same time, I felt that what was happening there was real. Fear had evolved into pure survival. I screamed, demanding that it go away, that it leave me alone. My voice echoed in the cabin, and for a second, the shadow backed away as if hesitating. But then the truck's lights flickered, the radio turned on by itself, emitting a hellish metallic noise. Amidst the hissing, that distorted voice grew, as if it were furious. I broke out in a cold sweat. The shadow disappeared from the seat and reappeared in front of the windshield, staring at me from outside. I gathered my courage, opened the door and jumped out onto the wet road, expecting to find, I don't know, anything. But the air vibrated, dense, as if the darkness itself had life. The silhouette dissipated but left something on the ground, dimly illuminated by the headlights. It looked like a metal plate, similar to those used for military identification. When I got closer, I saw a name that was almost erased, but it gave me the chills. That confirmed what I'd been feeling. The entity that haunted me must have been someone who had left this place and was somehow trapped there. I grabbed the license plate and got back into the truck, praying that everything would go back to normal. And it did. The engine ran, the lights stabilized, and the rest of the journey was a blur with no further disturbances. I delivered the cargo, but asked to change the route the next day. Since then, I have been driving differently. Every time I take a deserted stretch, I feel like the shadow could return at any moment. That little sign is still with me. I don't know if getting rid of it would solve anything, but part of me thinks that as long as I have it, I could end up trapped by this entity. What about you? Would you drive at night after knowing this? 3. What's up, guys? My name is Adriano. I'm 45 years old, and I've been a truck driver since I was 18. The road has always been my life and my passion, but it's also where I've experienced the worst scares of my life. I'm going to tell you about a trip that turned my world upside down. Whether it was real or a figment of my imagination, I still don't know, but it left a lasting impression on me. Oh, it did. I was going through a difficult phase. I owed money down to my underwear. The truck was at risk of being repossessed, and the company I worked for was on the verge of going bankrupt. So when they offered me shipping for double the normal price, I didn't think twice. It might even be suspicious, but I needed the money. The man who hired me only demanded that I not open the trailer under any circumstances and that I deliver it before sunrise. I was suspicious, but I accepted. I arrived at the shed around 11 at night. The place was sinister, isolated, with that horror movie atmosphere. A tall, slender man with a disturbing smile was waiting for me. He gave me half the payment in an envelope and repeated the rule. Don't open the trailer, don't stop, and follow the route without deviations. I tried to figure out what was in there, but he just pointed to the truck and said, trust the route. I hitched up the trailer and set off. At first, everything was fine, a deserted road, silence broken only by the engine. But then the first noises started. They were scratching sounds coming from the trailer. I thought it was the load settling in, but they started getting louder, as if something was trying to get out of there. I also heard whispers in the cabin. At first faint. Soon they got louder, sounding like voices that didn't speak any language I knew. I couldn't stand the tension and stopped at a simple but open gas station. While I was filling up, the attendant, a grim-faced man, said, "Are you coming from that road?" I nodded. He laughed humorlessly and said, "Then good luck, young man. Not everything there is what it seems." A chill ran through me, but I continued on my way. But things got worse. The trailer shook, the whispers grew louder, and the asphalt seemed to get darker with every mile. Suddenly, I saw a shadow cross the front of the truck. I slammed on the brakes and the vehicle almost skidded. There was nothing there, but when I looked back, I saw a figure standing in the back of the trailer, staring at me. I was so scared that I sped up, determined to get this over with. Luckily, I arrived at the warehouse before dawn. I felt relieved for a moment, but it didn't last. The building was old, filthy, and lost in the woods. The same guy with the smile was there, seeming to know exactly what I had seen. He asked, almost mockingly, "Did the package bother you a lot?" I swallowed hard and didn't answer. I received the rest of my payment and left as quickly as possible, believing that the nightmare was over. Big mistake. That same night at home, I heard light knocks, which sounded like the tow truck. Then whispers in the hallways, as if someone was walking around there. I tried to ignore it, but things were getting serious. One morning, in the bathroom, washing my face, I raised my head and saw the dark figure in the mirror behind me. I turned around, and there was nothing. But the feeling of being watched consumed me. Desperate, I returned to the warehouse where it all began, only to find an abandoned place full of strange symbols, marked on the walls with something that looked like dried blood. A local resident warned me, "Go away, boy. This place is cursed." The feeling of being persecuted intensified. Every night there were knocks and whispers. I saw that figure in every corner of the house. Unable to bear it any longer, I retraced the route of the truck, trying to find some explanation. It was early morning, the trailer was empty, but I could still hear the noises, as if something was there with me. In the most isolated stretch, the truck's engine died, the lights flickered, and a figure materialized in front of the headlights. It had dull eyes and a smile that didn't seem human. It walked toward me, and the air around it became so cold that I could barely breathe. The thing whispered something that I didn't understand, but it caused me absurd agony. Then, in an instant, everything disappeared. I woke up on the side of the road, with police officers and paramedics helping me out of the cab. They told me I was alone, that there was no sign of anyone else. How could I explain to them everything that had happened? There was no point. I went home, and since then, I have not accepted suspicious services. But the feeling of being followed remains, as if that creature had marked me. You might think that is crazy, but if you saw what I saw, you might think twice before opening any mysterious trailer out there. 4. Look, guys, I'm not one to make up horror stories to get attention, but what I'm going to tell you now still gives me the chills. If you're a truck driver, pay attention, because it could save you one day. It all happened during a regular trip. I had left Boa Vista very late with a load of plastic bottles that I needed to deliver to the city of Vista Alegre. It was the usual routine: road, coffee, music to keep me awake. The weather was actually good, the sky was clear, the road was free. But there was something in the air, that feeling that someone was watching you, even if there wasn't a soul around. After hours behind the wheel, I decided to stop at a gas station to stretch my legs and buy a coffee. That kind of abandoned gas station with the lights flickering and an attendant who wasn't really in the mood to chat. So far, everything is normal. I got my coffee, and when I got back to the truck, I came across a scene that made me freeze. Leaning against the gas station wall, near my vehicle, was a woman. It hadn't rained in days, but she was soaked, as if she had just stepped out of a river. I've seen strange things before, but this was new. Even though I was scared, I went over and asked her if she needed help. She looked at me with a blank stare and didn't say anything. She seemed disoriented. I tried to insist, but she ended up climbing into the cabin, as if she wanted a ride. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I felt sorry for her. I tried to talk to her, to ask her where she was from, but she just stayed silent. Then my cell phone rang. It was Jonas, a colleague, warning about a dangerous stretch ahead. In the middle of the conversation, he mentioned, "I've heard strange reports out there, people disappearing. They say it's something that doesn't belong in this world. Be careful, okay?" I hung up and looked to the side. The woman remained motionless. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that took my breath away. In the mirror, she didn't look like the same person. Her skin was gray. Her eyes were just hollow sockets. I turned my head to look at her directly, and in the blink of an eye, she was normal again. I almost let the truck stall. The atmosphere inside the cabin became unbearable. The silence became increasingly awkward, and every time I tried to start a conversation, she looked at me with an expression of pure emptiness. At one point, I couldn't take it anymore and asked, "Where do you need to go?" She answered softly, with a voice that sounded like an echo, "I'm trying to get back home." And that scared me to death. Her voice seemed to have more than one timbre, like two people talking at the same time. I kept driving, but I noticed that the road signs looked rusty and faded, and the streetlights were gone. I looked at the dashboard and saw that the clock had stopped. The air felt heavy and my whole body was shivering. When I glanced sideways in the rearview mirror, I almost let go of the steering wheel again. Her reflection now showed a deformed face with no eyes. I looked away, but I was so scared I could barely breathe. She then turned her face toward me, and her lips moved in an almost supernatural way. A "help me" escaped her, but it sounded more like an order than a request. Suddenly the truck's radio turned on by itself, emitting a horrible hiss. Amidst the static, I heard a hoarse, desperate voice. "She doesn't belong here. Get out while you can." My heart was beating faster than ever. I tried to stay calm, but the truck started to accelerate on its own. The brake pedal wouldn't respond, and it was like we were racing straight into darkness. On the shoulder of the road, I saw several silhouettes. They looked like people, but they were so pale and still that they looked like living statues. They just watched us pass by, expressionless. The woman next to me started to laugh softly, a laugh that grew louder until it echoed in the cabin. Then out of nowhere, the truck swerved off the road, heading straight for a line of trees. The impact was brutal, metal twisting, glass shattering. That was the last thing I heard before I blacked out. I woke up surrounded by police officers and paramedics. My head hurt, and all I could do was scream, "Where is she? Where is the woman who was here?" They looked at me in astonishment. "Sir, you were alone. There was no one in the truck." I was stunned, but no one could find a sign of this woman. Later, I researched the stretch and discovered stories of fatal accidents, including a young woman who died in one of them, supposedly on her way home. Since that day, I have no doubts about anything. I respect every second on the road because I believe that some things are beyond our understanding. 5. I'll be honest, remembering this still gives me goosebumps. It happened a few years ago, but it feels like yesterday. I was calm until Rodrigo, a very experienced truck driver, invited me on a last-minute trip. He didn't like driving at night. He said it wasn't fear, but respect for the unknown. I used to laugh at him, but now I think differently. Our task was to deliver construction materials to a small town in the countryside. Nothing complicated, but Rodrigo seemed strange. He said that the truck was leaving the workshop due to unexplained problems. He avoided going into details, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. Anyway, I accepted, thinking it would be just another trip. We left late in the afternoon. The sun was still shining brightly. I tried to make conversation, and he told me stories of apparitions on the road, wandering souls haunting truck drivers. I laughed, saying that these legends were the result of tiredness. He became serious. "I don't joke about things I don't understand. One day, you'll see." As the sun disappeared, the road took on a heavy feel. The shadows of the trees stretched like claws, and the curves seemed tighter. The forest was thick, and only the engine broke the silence. The conversation died down, and a tense atmosphere filled the cabin. I tried to distract myself by looking out the window, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. Soon, we saw something in the middle of the road ahead. At first, I thought it was an animal. As I got closer, I realized it was someone, a man in a hood, standing right in the middle of the road, but his feet weren't touching the ground. He seemed to be floating. When he turned around, I noticed a greenish glow where his eyes should have been. It chilled my spine. "Don't look directly at him," Rodrigo said, his voice shaking as he tried to dodge. But the man moved to block. Suddenly, the truck died. The headlights, engine, radio, everything went out. It seemed like even the air had become denser. Rodrigo began to pray quietly, and I felt despair rising. Suddenly, we heard voices coming from the forest, moans, whispers. Through the side window, I saw handprints, dirty with dirt, pressed against the glass. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice almost gone, but Rodrigo didn't answer. He kept praying. The voices got louder and louder, and figures moved around the truck. They looked like people, but they were moving too fast. Then the engine started up again by itself, and Rodrigo accelerated hard. "Don't look back!" he shouted. But of course I did. In the rearview mirror, I saw the hooded man standing there staring at us. And behind him, other shadows were emerging from the trees, a crowd emerging. I felt a sense of dread that was hard to describe. Sometime later, we stopped at a gas station. Rodrigo went to talk to the attendant while I tried to calm down. When he came back, he explained that there had been reports of a terrible accident there, involving a school bus that had overturned, leaving all the passengers trapped in that place somehow. Ever since then, truck drivers have seen inexplicable things. On the way back, we didn't take our eyes off the road. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, looking for the hooded man, but he didn't reappear. Rodrigo sighed in relief. Sometimes they only show their faces once. It's better this way. I never drove down that road again at dawn. I always say that no matter how much we doubt, there are things in the darkness that we don't understand. And if I have a choice, I'd rather not find out.